Hey, Ms. Bahak here. Welcome to an episode of the Habit Chess podcast. If this is our first time crossing paths, on the show, I read books to become a better skill stacker and share what I learn. And in today's episode, I'm particularly excited because I read a book I've been wanting to for quite some time, and I recommend this one as a gift as well. This is definitely one that would make that list. It's called How to Do Things You Hate by Peter Hollins. And it immediately stuck out to me as a skill that is worth mastering because in any endeavor, you are going to encounter certain elements and tasks and things that you have to do to get to your ultimate North Star that you don't like, you don't enjoy. And this book really does a great job of diving into what's going on behind procrastination. Why do we delay things? It's not just because maybe we're lazy. And there are things that I feel like are great takeaways for anybody who is developing a new skill or sharpening an existing one, because no matter what level you're at, there are things you're not going to enjoy doing. And so this book was a great deep dive into that. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the main concepts. Also, make sure to grab your copy of this book in the description below. You can also sign up for free for the Habit Chess newsletter, where I typically send out a distilled version of a lot of these highlights. Anyways, let's dive into the first one. You procrastinate for a reason. Understand that reason, and you give yourself a real chance to do something different. Laziness can be defined as the conscious unwillingness to put in the necessary effort required for a task, encompassing both mental and physical exertion. The reason that I wanted to start with this one is because this is often a form of the self-talk that people who are procrastinating tend to have, right? Oh, I didn't do this because I'm lazy, right? And he goes on to construct this later on in the book, but one of the key themes that I want to highlight right away is the fact that you want to expand your vocabulary for labeling your emotions. This is something he gets into later on in the book. But the reason for this is because if lazy is the only word that you have to describe how you feel about your procrastination, there are times where that's going to be inaccurate. You aren't lazy, maybe in that moment. Maybe you're just dehydrated and need some water, right? So there are different ways where you can begin to attack some of these problems if you can label them in a more specific way. Furthermore, laziness is not just a result of these many complicated variables, it also acts as a trigger for secondary behaviors, thoughts, and feelings. It goes into how laziness is not the only thing, right? It could be fear, I can't do it. Fear can paralyze you. Fear in this context is a reaction to what we expect to happen once we take action. And I really like this line here. Don't avoid the fear, embrace it. Look at it square on and decide that it can be whatever it wants to be, but that it will never be a reason to not act. In other words, separate action from how you feel. You can always act regardless of how you feel. Being scared is not dangerous, and there is no need for it to stop you from doing anything. I thought that was a particularly helpful 2 to 3 sentences, right? When has somebody last given you permission to be like, hey, these are two separate things? I really like how it separates these two things. It's like you're allowed to feel the fear, but it is not an excuse or a reason to not act. Those are two separate things. And I know that's different from how we think maybe by default, but it feels like a worthy thought pattern to begin to include, right? It's like if you start paying attention and thinking about things that way, think about 6 months or a year from now, you're going to be a beast because you will have such an action bias and you will not really depend on feeling great, feeling bad, feeling sad, feeling anything in order to take action. And so I thought that was a particularly useful framework. I like this one. In other words, remaining enthusiastic and motivated is not a state of mind that comes for free, but something you have to actively and consciously develop. This one you may have heard before, but we must first consciously choose to act towards our goals, and that will create and then sustain a feeling of motivation. And what's cool about this is that it often does not take an hour, 2 hours of chipping away at something. We may think in our mind, have blown it up, okay, it's going to take that long, but it may very well be a few minutes. Let's say it's exercise, right? Hopping on your bike and pedaling for a few minutes may give you the dopamine hit and the exciting feelings to keep going, whether it's for more than a few minutes or whether it is to call it a day and come back the next day, right? Because you'd rather have that than maybe, hey, I went 2 hours hard, all or nothing on this day, but I'm not coming back to biking for 2 weeks because I didn't have those 2 hours, right? And so I like how it's painting the image in our minds of if you want more fuel, you want more motivation, the way to achieve that is by acting in very small ways. ways. If you find you are slothful and unmotivated, try to think of it as a simple problem of lost momentum. The worst thing you can do is assume that your goal is somehow a bad fit for you or something that you don't truly want after all. It's more likely that you've simply allowed your motivational fire to burn too low. And so then this becomes, are you dedicated to feeding the fire, right? Whether it is books, talking to people, motivation, all of these things actually keep that fire going, right? It prevents it from fizzling out. And then you've probably felt the feeling of when you, let's say, work out for a couple months and then you stop working out and you come back to it fresh for the first time in a while. It takes a little bit of momentum to get going in those first few workouts, right? And so the power of keeping that fire going, even if it's a small fire, is very valuable. It maintains this constant sustained effort, which I think does exactly what this visual is trying to paint, right? It helps you maintain and grow that fire. I like this one. Non-identification means to recognize that the thoughts and feelings associated with the state of mind are something you are currently doing, but they are not who you are. I am not my body. I am not my mind. I'm not my thought. I'm not my emotion. This creates some psychological distance, which then grants you a special power, the ability to consciously choose what you do next. I really like that. What a powerful frame. Oh, I love this part where it's talking about acceptance and how acceptance means you're consciously choosing not to add any more darts, right? This means that we deal with the pain that really is there, the first dart, and we don't voluntarily make any more pain for ourselves than we need to. Acceptance and avoidance are opposites. The practice of acceptance is not to make you a passive doormat. Rather, it's to empower you. Oh, there's a cool method it talks about here called the RAIN method. So it stands for recognize, accept, investigate, and non-identification. Become aware of your experience, accept it completely, inquire into its nature, and ensure you have some psychological distance so you can make conscious choices moving forward. This is another cool quote right here. The behavior is not what made that person successful. The mindset was. And it goes into these three key things that are important for the mindset of people who have a lot of motivation, discipline, and effectiveness in life, which is number one, their ability to embrace and work with discomfort. Number two, their psychological flexibility. And number three, their capacity for emotional self-regulation. Okay, so this concept of, I'm going to mispronounce it, but I think it's Misogi involves undertaking epic challenges in nature to reset the mind, body, and spirit and expand one's capabilities. And basically what that's talking about is introducing yourself to hard things and discomfort regularly, because everything with technology and science, the way it's trending, is removing a lot of discomfort, right? And so this is why you often notice working out and training, moving your body is such a great way to do this. It's why so many high performers tend to gravitate towards challenging themselves to Spartan races and triathlons and things that are just difficult to do, right? Because I think it definitely how you see yourself, right? You may be scared of that thing. You might be like, I don't know if I can do it, but to train for that Ironman and to actually execute it and to get to accept the identity that I am somebody who can do an Ironman. I'm somebody who has prepared for one. I'm sure that has a good feeling and impact on the other things that you might be striving for in your life. And so choose uncomfortable situations where a comfortable one would be easy and convenient. So these are tiny little things, right? Elevators right there, but hey, I'm going to take the stairs, right? Or I'm going to park in a spot that's farther away from the grocery store instead of directly there. So I have to walk a little more. Oh, there's this model that he talks about called action and commitment therapy. Simply, action is about learning to stay focused on what you value no matter what negative or uncomfortable sensations arise. This ability is what is termed psychological flexibility. And it's this idea that no matter how tough things get, no matter how much chaos is going on around you, people who are psychologically flexible, they have the ability to hold true and come back to their values, even in the midst of all of the chaos that might be going on around them. And so what this reminds me of is definitely coming together and putting a values list. If you've never taken the time to actually verbalize what some of your values are, I highly recommend it. I did this probably earlier in the year. It's evolved a little bit. I've changed it. I've added things. I've refined it. In general, I've turned it into a tool where where on most days I try to begin the day by skimming through. Instead of scrolling on maybe Instagram or something like that, I scroll through my mission, vision, values list. And it's just a great reminder to be able to set the soundtrack for your day. And I hope, my assumption is that if you do that daily, that is contributing to some level of expanding your psychological flexibility. Okay, this was pretty cool. So this can be a breakthrough idea for some people. You do not have to like a task to do it. And you can experience unpleasant emotions around the task without those emotions meaning anything in particular. And it sounds funny when you say it like that, duh, right? But at the same time, subconsciously, we may be running on that pattern, right? Where we're like, okay, I don't like this, which means I don't feel like doing it, which means maybe there's something wrong. There's all these thoughts and behaviors that can arise out of that unless you're consciously calling it out like Peter Hollins did here. The great thing about the present moment is that not only is it far more manageable to engage with, but it also happens to be the only place from which you can actually change your world, no matter how much you regret the past or ruminate. That's pretty cool. That's true. It definitely motivates you to anchor into the present a little bit more. Okay, this was a game-changing concept. Neuroscientist and author of My Stroke of Insight, Jill Bolt Taylor, explains what she thinks of as a 90-second rule. When a person has a reaction to something in their environment, there's a 90-second chemical process that happens. Any remaining emotional response is just the person choosing to stay in that emotional loop. And so it talks about this emotional loop where you can get stuck, right? You can keep refreshing the 90 seconds over and over because let's say now you're mad that you got mad in the first place, right? Or you're denying that you are mad, and it keeps that cycle maybe rolling. But I think it's extremely empowering to know whether maybe it is 2 or 3 minutes instead of the 90 seconds, right? But giving you a general framework to actually go, okay, 90 seconds, that's not terribly long. It's not 90 minutes, right? And now gives you a starting point to be like, all right, I have to say, after I encountered this piece of information, right? The 90-second rule, whether it's inaccurate and it's actually 3 minutes or 30 seconds instead of the 90, I don't care about that. I like that it gives me a general rule of thumb that's, hey, it's not 90 minutes, it's only 90 seconds. And so you can't unhear that piece of information for some reason, where if you find yourself stuck in the middle of an emotional reaction, I found myself beginning to think of exactly what I read here. It doesn't mean that it didn't last beyond 90 seconds, but now again that you are aware of it, it gives you something to shoot for, right? It gives you something to go, okay, you know what? Instead of even maybe burying something and being like, I'm not gonna entertain that, I'm not going to be angry about that, I'm gonna pretend like I'm not. You now have something where you're like, I'm gonna give myself 90 seconds. Let me start a timer. I'm gonna give myself 90 seconds to actually feel this and then move on. And for whatever reason, it talks about earlier that whole acceptance stage in that RAIN model, where that A stands for acceptance, and it actually has an impact on your ability to move beyond the pain or whatever that emotion might be, is just accepting it. The more you deny, if you're angry, but you're denying that you're angry, that can actually keep rolling and make you even more angry, right? And it's a very interesting concept here. Coming back to the labeling of emotions, remember I mentioned this earlier in the book, where developing an extensive emotional vocabulary can greatly support your journey. The ability to name and identify specific emotions provides a powerful tool for understanding and managing them. As in the last point, there's great value in knowing the difference between tired and unmotivated, because the solution to each problem will be very different. And it talks about the danger of, if you don't have a very wide vocabulary to label some of these things, it will always resort to something really big like bad, or I'm feeling mad or angry, when there's 10 different shades of emotions inside of mad or inside of sad. And it might be worth figuring that out. Now, through his research, Ferrari has identified 2 main reasons behind procrastination. 1, people delay action. People delay taking action because they don't feel like they are in the right mood to complete the task. And number 2, people believe that their mood will change in the near future. There's this mode that it talks about, right? Which is, instead of now avoiding the negativity, oh, I don't want to feel lazy, so I'm going to do this, right? Focus on the rewards that actually come as a result of you doing the task. Because when you're focusing on the negativity, that's all you can think about, right? You just see the thorn. What if you stop and actually think for a second? How will completing this goal be valuable in how I see myself? How will completing this goal be valuable in how others see me? And how will completing this goal be valuable to my personal growth? For whatever reason, those 3 questions opens a loop in your mind that is worth entertaining from time to time. According to Amisha Jha, author of Peak Mind, Find Your Focus, Own Your Attention, Invest 12 Minutes a Day, our attention operates in 3 major modes. Number 1 is the flashlight mode, orienting system. Number 2 is the caution sign, alerting system. And number 3 3 is the juggler, which is the executive functioning. The exercise that it talks about to help practice this flashlight feature is basically if you have a soft gaze on something that's maybe in the room, okay? Let's say it's a plant that you're looking at. You try to let everything else fade out of focus so that all you are thinking about and looking at is basically that plant. And that is an example of how you can begin to selectively train that muscle where you have to focus in on something for a little period of time. Instead, that practice is about gaining awareness over what it's focusing on, and then in time, learning to turn that beam where you want it to shine. It goes on to talk about this concept of how stress, healthy stress, acute stress, can help you actually focus, right? So that's why when you feel like you might perform a little bit better under pressure, oh, the assignment's due the next day, and now all of a sudden my brain kicked into gear and I'm crushing it and I feel super focused. It's because you're experiencing that tiny bit of stress, right? It's a good amount of stress. Caffeine is another way to do this, right? This is why coffee gives us kind of this sense of focus, right? This, when used in the right amounts, it can actually make you feel hyper-focused and productive. And so this is super cool. The Arrow model of focus explains the role of epinephrine, acetylcholine, and dopamine in driving, focusing, and sustaining our attentional awareness, respectively, to improve self-discipline, increase/modulate these levels using meditation and visualization techniques, good stress caffeine, and healthy lifestyle choices. So I thought this was cool. Without epinephrine, we are lethargic. Like an arrow that has no shaft, we lack any force or thrust behind our goals, no matter how well defined they are. Next, without choline, we are scattered and useless. Like an arrow that has no point. We can fling ourselves with energy and motivation into new tasks, but we lack effectiveness because that energy just dissipates if it can't be focused onto one specific point. And then lastly, without dopamine, we lack discipline and consistency. We are like the perfect arrow that nonetheless crumbles to nothing within a few minutes. We may have the initial spark to do something and know what we have to do, we just can't sustain motivation long enough to do it. And he basically talks about how you need all three of those chemicals. You can't just have one or two out of the three. You need the acetylcholine, and coming back to how he summarized that later, where it's responsible for driving, focusing, and sustaining your effort. And like he mentioned in the summary, epinephrine, acetylcholine, and dopamine responsible in driving, focusing, and sustaining our attentional awareness, respectively, right? So epinephrine is responsible for driving, acetylcholine is responsible for focusing, and dopamine is responsible for sustaining our attentional awareness. So I love this concept. He talks about the first pancake theory, how the first task is not going to be, it's like a throwaway task. It's just to get your practice run out there. So you have your biggest task where you're eating the frog and maybe trying to accomplish that for the day, but before you do that, you might have something super simple. Drink a glass of water or make yourself some coffee or something very simple that allows you in your mind to go, okay, cool, I checked the box. This is where that concept, I think, comes from about making your bed, right? It makes you feel like you accomplished something before you even have left your room. So I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Make sure to grab your copy of How to Do Things You Hate by Peter Hollins in the description below. It's a very quick read and it's a wonderful gift if you're trying to equip certain people in your life with this skill. It's a very valuable thing, no matter who you are, what age you are, what you do, whether it's for professional, personal use. I feel like there are some words in here that can really expand someone's view of what their abilities are and what they can do. And so thanks for hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed it, drop a comment. Would love to hear from you. Appreciate your time, and I will see you on the next one.